Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, June 19th, 2024. You're listening to Weather with Enthusiasm. Records are breaking wildly across many states right now. The Washington Post really does a phenomenal job regarding that. We have the Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service, which, if you really want to understand what's going on in the upper atmosphere, there could be nothing better than the Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service forecast discussion from the several cities that I've seen. That forecast discussion seems to really go into detail more than some of the other cities. But the New Orleans National Weather Service forecast discussion brings the Bermuda High into the discussion along with the heat dome. The Bermuda High, that's something that those words have been left out, not just this year, but for many years. It's been 30 years. The focus 30 years ago was on the Bermuda High, but in recent years, all you hear about is the heat dome. Just heat dome, another heat dome, and you hear about the decimeter, which could be called decameters because some people are spelling it with a K, others with a C, but the measurement is going into the 590s. That's at the 500 MB part of the atmosphere, which is well over 19,000 feet up. This, a lot of times, could make thunderstorm development impossible if it gets high enough. When we say impossible, nothing's ever impossible for weather. But back in the 1995 heat wave here in the Midwest, we had a similar situation where the meteorologists would say it's just too hot for rain. The only thing is, somehow we are seeing thunderstorm development. Much of this is taking place along the Ring of Fire. But Caribou, Maine National Weather Service has been issuing severe thunderstorm warnings for that area. We have severe thunderstorm warnings in Vermont. We have It's for part of the county warning area, and the Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service, they've lowered their forecast highs due to potential thunderstorm development amongst some other issues as well. They also downgraded the excessive heat warning into a heat advisory, or just started out with a heat advisory instead of an excessive heat warning, since the situation's slightly cooler than what they thought. But the weather synopsis responsible for the heat is impressive, and that's what's getting much of the attention along with these record-breaking temperatures. Caribou, Maine tied a record of 96 degrees. That's an all-time high, believe it or not, with an unofficial record-breaking heat index of 103 yesterday afternoon. If you want to read more about that, the Washington Post goes into detail discussing each and every city. We also have tropical storm, which received a name today, as of this morning, Alberta, I think that's the name. It starts with an A, and it's headed into Mexico, but it's a very large 360-mile radius tropical storm, says the Brownsville National Weather Service, Brownsville, Texas, and it's affecting southern Texas. Current forecasts call for heavy rain of 4 to 8 inch accumulation, but just a second over there. Some areas may be getting up to 15 inches, but that's not the most intense part. Actual meteorologists have been observing the rainfall, tells us the Brownsville, Texas National Weather Service, and rain has been coming down at a rate of 4.5 inches an hour. When you read all of these warnings from hazardous weather discussions and everything, there's a feeling that we're talking about snowfall. Just the accumulations are so high. It says things like an additional 1 to 3 inches is expected. 1 to 3 inches has already fallen. Another one, it said 2 to 5 inches has already fallen, with an additional 1 to 3 inches expected. But we do have them saying isolated amounts of 15 inches. The weather map shows some areas 8 to 10 inches widespread. It's quite a tropical storm, and this is a very interesting situation taking place because it's not just one tropical storm. There are other waves which are developing, as one could expect because of the very warm ocean water temperatures. A lot of times these things don't happen, though, and they don't happen until August or late August. A lot of times due to the Sahara dust that gets put into the atmosphere, causing the rain to fall even before these things develop into anything big. But apparently this year, that's not the case. So this is just tropical storm number one. There's more coming for the weekend. The Miami, Florida National Weather Service has also issued tropical storm warnings for some of the offshore waters over there. So as these places are getting the heavy rain, the heat dome has been totally replaced is not the right word. There's another word, a very simple word, but it's just not coming right now. That heat dome has moved. It's been up in the, actually centered right over the mid-Atlantic area for this morning. Some say Pennsylvania, but it's also mid-Atlantic, and it's at 597 MB. You know, the Memphis, Tennessee National Weather Service, a lot of times they give the actual numbers, but New Orleans and Detroit, they also do it. A lot of them don't. A lot of them don't because the real focus is not always on the numbers. It's more about where will this heat dome be building? Where's it going? And it's headed west. It's headed west. That's where it's going. It's going to make its way into Phoenix, Arizona. We have excessive heat warnings in effect for Phoenix, Arizona today. High temperatures going up to 113 degrees. These heat indices, by the way, in the Great Lakes area, like Detroit, Michigan, and then you go over to the New England area, they're really nothing super impressive. But it's the consistency of the heat, and it's also the heat dome kind of creates the potential for things happening, for more extreme things happening than what was forecasted. Another thing to keep into account is that dew points, there are pockets of areas where the dew points are only in the well below 70, even the lower 60s, even upper 50s. Those areas, the sun is super efficient at heating things up. The sun is just so powerful this time of the year. The Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service has pointed out that even though there are certain variables in place that may be lowering those temperatures today, but the summer solstice is creating solar insolation that it really might not make that much of a difference. So these thunderstorms are creating a domino effect of additional thunderstorms. They're difficult to forecast. We have an outflow boundary that developed from a thunderstorm complex earlier today over Iowa. This outflow produced another area of thunderstorm development, which is headed into Illinois. It probably would dissipate before reaching Chicago, but it's not clear. The potential would be for one of these bands to come around mid-afternoon, which is right now, and then you see the clouds, but the other one could come around later on tonight. For the Chicago area, we have the lake cold front, which is always difficult to forecast. We'll be going back and forth along the lakeshore over the next couple of days, but not for Saturday. By Shabbos, that front moves over the lake. It moves north as a warm front. Southwest winds bring the intense heat all the way up to the lake. The one thing you have to realize is that the windy conditions a lot of times causes the drier air from the upper atmosphere to come down below and lower the humidity. It lowers the dew points a lot of times, but sometimes it doesn't. So the National Weather Service is struggling with what will the dew points be Saturday afternoon. Will there be a heat advisory or not? As of now, it looks like heat indices will be just in the upper 90s for the Chicago area, with temperatures also in the mid-90s. That's for Saturday afternoon, Shabbos afternoon. But things could change, and that heat will go all the way up to the lakeshore, all the way up the southwest for Shabbos, for Saturday, not for tomorrow or Friday. In fact, the lake front might even make it through downtown Chicago. There's even talk about fog developing in the downtown Chicago area for tomorrow morning. So there's a lot of things which are difficult to forecast if you're trying to get on the exact, but the general weather synopsis is super impressive. I mean, you can't get better than you have a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico, and then you have this powerful heat dome of 597 decimeters. And the European computer model shows it even shooting up to 599 decimeters at times. And we also have the good old Bermuda High. And here's another thing that we have not mentioned yet. There's many things we have not mentioned yet, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. But the one thing, New Orleans, Louisiana National Weather Service has issued a wind advisory for that area. Now, the wind advisory is not in effect due to the tropical storm. It's not a direct consequence of the tropical storm. It's due to a wind tunnel that has developed in between the tropical storm and the Bermuda High. This Bermuda high is stronger than usual. It's a surface high. It's also connected to the heat dome, but they're right in between. The New Orleans area is right in between the two, and there's a wind tunnel. That's a term you usually hear about in winter, these wind tunnels, but we have it here in the summer due to a tropical storm and a strong high pressure system. You know, in the winter, you get the strong Arctic high and a storm system, and you get the wind tunnels. We don't get it so much in the summer. We don't have the Arctic highs, but we have a Bermuda high. Something very interesting is that, you know, for many, many years, the summer heat used to come in from the south and move north. In fact, there would be a front that would be really draped across the mid-America going to the mid-Atlantic, and the front would move back and forth throughout the summer. And the whole question would be, it's like St. Louis, Missouri. Dave Murray, meteorologist, he would make a long-term forecast for St. Louis. He said the whole question is, will St. Louis be along the front or will it be south of the front? And that's how he would make his long-term forecast. So we have a front actually as we speak, a front going from central Wisconsin down into Kansas, and we do have a front that's going back and forth. But when you go into the East Coast, you'll see the heat is actually coming in from the north. The first place to get hit with the intense heat is New England. It's Maine. That's the first place to get hit. And don't think it ends there. Environmental Canada has issued extreme heat warnings in effect for a large part of Canada. We spoke about this in the previous episode. In Quebec, even Nova Scotia, surrounded by, one would think, cold water, they're under extreme heat warnings, and we spoke about that happening already a week ago, and it's actually happening. Temperatures well into the 90s over Nova Scotia. It doesn't end there. It goes into Newfoundland. And the heat doesn't end there. We can go into the international areas and speak about the Caspian Sea like we did yesterday, but we already spoke about it earlier today, actually. The Caspian Sea, wild stuff with ocean water temperatures at 87 degrees. If I could find the actual weather station, which is producing the windy.com, wherever they're getting the information from, it would be interesting to see what's going on over there. Caspian Sea is in Russia, and according to windy.com, you can't even find 87 degrees in the Gulf of Mexico, but I'm sure you could. I'm sure you could get 87 degrees in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, we have an area not just of warm water, deep warm water temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, where this tropical storm, different waves of low pressure will be traveling along, and that's when these storms really start to blow up. There was a focus on this back in August 2021. It doesn't end there. The Brownsville, Texas National Weather Service, this is actually very important for people living over there. A lot of people are evacuating due to floods. They pointed out that there is something which interferes with evacuation many times, and that might be interfering this time as well. An atmosphere favorable for tornadoes has developed right now, and there has not been any tornado warnings as far as I know, but it is a potential. More than a potential, the condition is favorable for tornadoes. There also has not been a tornado watch issued, the last I checked, for some reason. Usually when the atmosphere is favorable for tornadoes, that is when you issue a tornado watch, but the focus is so much on the tropical storm. We have the usual coastal flood advisories and warnings going across Louisiana, but that's, just the land over there is sinking, or the sea is rising, or both. It doesn't take much to issue a coastal flood warning in the New Orleans, Louisiana area. It's really weird stuff how the ocean is rising every year. It's the ocean over there. It's due to the ocean rising 4 times quicker than any other part of the world. It's just, I don't know if anybody has any explanation for that, why it should be 4 times quicker than any other part of the world. And then we have other areas which the land is sinking. It's really strange stuff going on down there. One has to wonder whether this marine heat wave that we've been under for over a year right now, whether that's possibly going to end. But here's the interesting thing. First of all, last year we also, in the beginning of summer, we had a heat dome that moved in from the north. The only thing is, it wasn't a powerful one. This one is much stronger. This one's a real one. If you look, there's already pretty accurate forecast. The long-term forecasting becomes more accurate in the summer for the month of July. But at the same time, because thunderstorms are not so predictable, hurricane tracks are not so predictable, any one of these things could just disrupt the whole forecast. But assuming that doesn't happen, we do have the heat dome building back into the middle part of the country. In fact, next week, the heat dome moves west over the weekend. It goes into the southern plains. And then next week, it moves back from the southern plains into the Mississippi River Valley. The center, perhaps in the lower Mississippi River Valley, but St. Louis, as usual, will be included. And it turns into a more typical weather pattern for next week. A lot of the stuff we didn't cover in this episode, we covered in the previous episode. Personally, I think the Arctic heat is actually super fascinating, but the Caspian Sea, I think, tops the charts over here with the warm water temperatures producing heat and humidity pumping into Russia. Astrakhan, 90s and 100s, all around there. Dew points in some of the areas on the coast in the 70s. The dew points in the Midwest are not as consistent as usual. We do find pockets of 70s. We find pockets of other things. A lot of the moisture is getting cut off by the tropical storm. You have a question then, why are dew points going into the 70s in some areas? There's many answers to those types of questions. But we do have some Gulf moisture making it over into the Midwest. Lake Erie has been a focus over here. The European computer model continues to advertise high dew point air coming off of Lake Erie. Do you realize how upside down things are for many locations? The European computer model, which is accurate, it's an accurate model. It's especially by dew point. I've had good experience with it over the past couple of years. So the last I checked, the air coming in off the Gulf of Mexico was dew points in the 60s. I'm sure there are some areas where you have dew points in the 70s, but the moisture is all by the tropical storm. But then you have Lake Erie. So you have dew points in the 60s over Cleveland, just south of Lake Erie. And as the wind goes over Lake Erie, especially tomorrow or the day after, the dew points just shoot up. You have Lake Erie, the shallowest lake of all the lakes. That one heats up the quickest, all the way up north there. It seems like that's producing more humidity than our good old, the ultimate humidity producer, the Gulf of Mexico. And then you have the Caspian Sea, just strange stuff. The Persian Gulf is just sizzling. Water temperatures, as usual, with very high dew point air. If you're on a boat in the middle of the Persian Gulf, the forecast is calling for highs in the mid-90s and dew points of 86 degrees. That's off the heat index charts. That's how hot that is. But the moment you hit land, the dew points just drop drastically. You have wet bulb temperatures, not wet bulb global temperatures, wet bulb temperatures going into the upper 80s if you're on the Persian Gulf. Super dangerous stuff when you head out there. We have the classic 120s are within the 10-day forecast for many locations when you go out into those countries around the Persian Gulf. And we even have some low 120s headed for the desert Southwest by the end of next week, along with 90-degree temperatures headed into the Arctic Thursday next week. Fort Yukon, Alaska, forecast highs 88 and 89 degrees. Let's quickly do a translation into Celsius right now. Most of the world follows the Celsius. Fort Yukon, Alaska, that's above the 30 degrees Celsius threshold for a heat wave, which is the definition in the northern latitudes according to most countries. So 30 degrees Celsius is 86. They have high temperatures going to 31 degrees Celsius. Fort Yukon, Alaska. That place is being affected by the global greenhouse situation, according to the Washington Post, more so than any other place. I believe they said in the world, certainly Alaska, but they said in the world, things are happening quicker over there. That's the situation for Fort Yukon, Alaska. When you go into the Caspian Sea, the Caspian Sea water temperature, 30 degrees Celsius. The dew points in the Persian Gulf, 30 degrees Celsius with a temperature of 35 degrees Celsius. You can't even imagine how hot that is, how that would feel. But only people on a boat would be aware of that. And you have dew points reaching 25 degrees Celsius over Lake Erie, and even some of the counties north of that, 70-degree dew points even headed into Canada. while we don't have 70-degree dew points in many locations in between the Gulf of Mexico and Canada. It looks like Lake Erie is really producing it. I haven't seen anybody talk about that, but it's as clear as can be. If you look at the year, it's just very clear, and we'll see what happens regarding that. The temperatures across the East Coast, 35 degrees Celsius in many locations. That's mid-90s, and we do have in Caribou, Maine, temperature hit 35. It might even be 36 degrees Celsius, 96 degrees Fahrenheit, with a heat index of 103. That's about 39 or 40 degrees Celsius. That's the highest that's ever happened. That is an unofficial reading again. And so much other things that we haven't covered, have not converted into Celsius, and other things that I know we have not covered in the weather as well. If they come to mind within the next 10 seconds, we will cover it. Otherwise, we're going to call it a day. And that will... I'll just point out one thing. The Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service has been very clear in pointing out that the heat dome is being controlled by the tropical storm. You see, it's really the question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because tropical storm, the heat domes cause tropical storms to go around it. It's almost like it's a dome, and it causes storms to go around it. That's why we have the ring of fire. At the same time, though, hurricanes could also direct the heat dome, so it kind of works together. The Detroit, Michigan National Weather Service has pointed out that part of it, and they also gave other reasons for the placement of this heat dome, why it's further north than usual, a different trough over California, even though you will see heat advisories in California as well. And we are going to end with that. I wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Have a wonderful week.